Welcome to the Book Corner with me, Mish Atagana, a podcast for book lovers and book lovers adjacent. So, if you want to hear discussions about books, world building, characters, plot twist, this is the podcast for you. It is a discussion based podcast that really delves into a story and what makes us love the story. So, I hope you enjoy the Book Corner with me, Mish Atagana. Today's book is The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. So, those of you that follow me on Instagram know that I started reading this book when I was in London, and it took me a little while to get into it. I think this is in recent times, this is the book that has taken me the longest to read. It took me about 3 or so weeks to read it. And that's not to say it's a difficult read. Anyone that's read the work of N.K. Jemisin knows that she is an intensely visual writer. I did not anticipate just how much that visual world will kind of have me enthralled and also have me feeling like I need a break. So even the plot of the story just can also be a little bit overwhelming in that sense. So that in itself kind of made me go, whew, I need a bit of a break to kind of absorb everything that I've been, reading and everything that I've been kind of learning in this process. So it took me a little while to get into it. But that being said, that visual quality makes this such an incredible world to exist in, right? So the city we became is part of the Great Cities series. I've just started reading The World We Make. Hopefully, it wouldn't take me as long to get through The World We Make as it did The City We Became. All right, so one thing about this book is I just really love some of the themes, the core themes that it explores, right? It focuses very much on like what does it mean for a city to build what does community mean in a city? Like there's themes around like the birthing of a city, which the city in this case is New York, forming of community, the fight for existence. Like the story literally begins with a fight for existence, right? And also celebration and responsibility. So this is kind of some of the things that I picked up. But like let's begin on the fight for existence, because that's where kind of our plot begins. We meet like this queer black graffiti artist who pretty much is a street kid, but he has a thing for rooftops. Seems to exist on the rooftops of New York. And he meets this guy, Paolo, um, and Paolo is encouraging him to kind of get ready for this emergence, right? And as you kind of read it, it takes a while, at least for me anyway, it took a while for me to understand what they were trying to say. And what that was is like this kid is the human avatar or embodiment, if you will, of the city of New York. So this world exists similar to ours, and we'll get a little bit more into the world and the world building here. But it's similar to ours, but it's about the cities that become sentient, right? So a city with a consciousness, a city with feelings, a mind of its own, and it feels the concrete, the lifeblood of the city. And this young guy who becomes the avatar of New York, like the birth. We witness the birth of a city, right, of New York City, of its consciousness. And Paulo, who happens to be the avatar of Sao Paulo, um, is trying to guide him. But we start with this fight for existence where there's a battle on like Williamsburg Bridge. And this really stuck out for me because I love Williamsburg Bridge. It's one of my favorite bridges in New York City. Every time I go to New York, I always love to go to Williamsburg Bridge. I just love it. So it kind of they begin this battle here where it's like a fight for dominance of the city, and I I kind of thought like, wait, what's happening? Like, what is this force that's trying to invade the city? uh, and it literally is like this interdimensional being. So there's also ideas of parallel worlds here. So this interdimensional being, either trying to assimilate, absorb the city. So our young, newly birthed in New York City is in a fight for his life, right? He finally does win this fight, but he gets heavily wounded in the process and just disappear. Now, Paolo can't find him. Um, there, Paolo's in contact with some other entity trying to figure out what's going on, and they're trying to understand, like, is this, did this city actually get birthed, did it get destroyed, what's going on? But they can tell that it's not quite over. And now, because the city is at this balance where it could win or lose, we kind of get to, like, okay, what is the 2.0 plan to save the city? And in developing this 2.0 plan, this is where we meet Manny, right? Manny gets off at Penn Station. He's not sure who he is, what he's supposed to be doing. He knows he's here for some job, and he's got a briefcase. He's in and out of consciousness. His memory is fragmented. His consciousness is fragmented, and he's trying to figure it out. And then he kind of begins to grasp something of the city, like grasp his like soul as an embodiment of New York City. So he, where he's at, he's like, okay, this thing that's happening, I know why this is happening. Like, this thing has come here because I need it. So a cab shows up with this girl driving this cab, and he knows he has to get in the cab, and he knows this girl will help him get where he needs to go, right? And he's like, okay, where we need to go is this place. And then there's like this tentacle creatures, and he's like, okay, I know I have to go stop this tentacle creatures. And it's really, fascinating, because it just, he at the minute that he gains the consciousness to know that he is the embodiment of Manhattan, he becomes a target, right? So the enemy, this like malevolent force, like I said, this interdimensional being, wants to consume him and wants to like attack him, and before he fully understands like what his powers are about, or what he is, and what it means. So we're like deep in that. And then, like, all of a sudden, it's like, why is he the only one that can see this? Why is this girl with him can see this? And he needs to do this battle, but he knows it's not over, right? And like I said, like this whole idea, this fight for survival, for existence, but the existence is very fragmented, So having manifested, now that the main avatar is kind of somewhere lost, right? Like he's in a coma, he then splinters into, like I said, the five boroughs. And because there's so many of them, there's five of them, each of the boroughs, they need to find each other and begin working on defeating this enemy before the enemy kind of finds them and destroys them individually. So it's like think of it as assembling your Avengers, like, gather your fighters, if you will. So we're gathering our fighters. Each new borough like awakens, and they face personal confusion. Like, they don't, they it takes them a little while to kind of get who they are. I really love, like I said, Bronca for me was a turning point in reading this book and going, yeah, Broncos was where we're at, So Manny Manhattan is like, yes, we're ready. Bronca, who represents the Bronx, she's brash and resilient, but it's just like the personalities are so different. Like, Brooklyn is like this artistic, fun loving, has a very artistic drive. Staten Island is a whole problem. It's a whole problem for them. But it's very isolationist, and there's a lot of distrust. Like when we meet Staten Island, she's getting on a ferry, and her thoughts are like, oh my gosh, there are black people around me, save me. You know what I mean? So it's that kind of stuff. So we meet all these bars, they need to get together to fight, but they're different. They're very distinct personalities, and they're very distinct core beliefs that they all have. And then we have like our mentor, Sao Paulo, who is kind of like the OG Avatar, because Sao Paulo is very super experienced, and they're here to guide these fledgling avatars and help them with, you know, defending the city so it can fully be birthed. And it really kind of, I like the way I look at Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo is kind of like your somewhere between your Obi-Wan Kenobi meets like what's his name from Rocky Balboa, his trainer from Rocky Balboa. I always forget. But it's kind of one of those where it's like, okay, I'm gonna guide you, I'm gonna train you, but it's like I'm gonna need you to know the task at hand. If we don't do it, it's all dunzos, right? So it's very much there. I really love the way that they build community here. If you kind of follow me on Instagram and you see the post I posted about this book, I talked a lot about how it's quite devastating in just some of the realities of being a black or person of color in America feels like. It's very devastating to kind of read some of those harsh realities. But I also like the community building that was here. That like each the way their strengths kind of complement each other as a collective, and the way they also use their unique differences and unique personalities to bridge their differences. It's very interesting to me, and I think that that also speaks to how an internal tension can really create a single entity, right? So these are all five unique individuals who must fight for the common good of one thing, which is the city of New York. um, and I really like also where it's not a battle in the sense of like battle in all in one place. It's not just Manny or Bronca. It is external battles. It's internal tensions. There's sacrifices to be made, right? Like the enemies attacking throughout the city with no regard for where the protectors can actually go, which is the very point, right? Divide and conquer. And it is like this monstrous grotesque things that are just like infesting people. They're influencing people. They're insidious. They're playing on people's prejudices, their people's fears, and things like that. Which to me speaks a little bit as well to how insecurities can drive hate and things like that, right? Which I'm sure that's the commentary that NK is trying to make with some of the stuff. Um, and like with it for me, like the internal tensions is really interesting because there's like issues around, I feel, gentrification, like we talked about social fragmentation, and just the real world struggles become so potent in this supernatural fight, which makes it all the more, it feels like everything is so much more like high stakes, right? And I also kind of felt that even when they won little things, it came like at great personal cost. Like the fight adds a lot of weight. Like at one point when I was reading this book, I'm like, for crying out loud, can we just catch a break, please? Like these people are going through the most. Can we just catch a break? Like I was very stressed. I was super stressed reading this book, guys. And and that's kind of one of the things like where I was saying like the world building here is so important in the storytelling. And I found that like an urban fantasy usually feels like things exist in our world, and we can kind of get by without feeling it affects adversely, right? So anyone that kind of read the Rivers of London books or even Harry Potter, like very few times does the world of mortals, if you will, feel like it's a stake, right? Um, the magical world always feels a stake, and our characters have to go fight for that world. But this story, it's not just like the world of the supernatural that was a stake. It's the whole world was a stake, right? The parallel universes, the dimensions were blurring into each other. If one falls, we all fall, kind of thing. And that for me, I thought was super interesting. So, like the idea of a city being a living, breathing thing, it's incredible. I just literally, I love it. And I also like how she expands beyond like New York City, like the parallel world of interdimensional beings. I thought was really, really interesting, and the fact that New York is one of many of the great cities, right? Like Sao Paulo, as we met, Sao Paulo has come to be. But the world building here is really incredible. I utterly love the world building here. Like the mythos also kind of imagines that we look at mythology and the way she rethinks it, like around gods and monsters and like this ancient lore that she just puts into the narrative. Um, while like we still exist in, quote unquote real world, but it gives this intense, extraordinary power within the novel's like high intensity framework. Like when I say high definition, I mean high definition. It felt like I was experiencing this novel in 3D. I'm not gonna lie. It felt like I was experiencing it in 3D. And I mean, I already discussed heavily about the social commentary, right? Um, like it just feels like this book, if we remove the magic element of it, it feels like everyday New York City. Like I have friends who live in New York, and when I talk to them about their life and their experiences, even when I'm in New York, I spend a lot of time in the city. Like I feel the struggles in this book. I feel the kind of diverse neighborhoods and the issues of gentrification. I feel the racism, the social, and I feel all of it, and we see it in the news, in stories that are being told. And that heightened kind of characterization of a city through the lens of this, for me, I think is also super fascinating in just the way was told. Character wise, for me, like I I'm not gonna lie, I was very fascinated by like the enemy, as she calls that she kind of terms the villain of the story, right? Like just the idea of this a creature bound, or an interdimensional force, whatever you want to call it, just bound on eradicating and assimilating these great cities. It's like just the malevolence, the way it kind of comes from like opposition to diversity and individuality, like difference. It just seems like it's the nature of this character is about seeding chaos and trying to find unison. And but it's like any kind of difference is not allowed. If a city is to be diverse, it is not allowed to exist. So the people in the city can't be different. They can't think differently. They can't have a sense of individual sense of being. They can't have a um, they can't they can't they can't think in contrast to what is the norm, right? So for me that's very, very interesting, and it's so contradictory to the very essence of some of the greatest cities in the world, right? Like Paris, London, New York. They're cities that thrive on diversity. They're cities that are built on differences. So for me, I really quite thought that was super interesting. I also feel that the making for I mean I think the way when she kind of made these avatars um super like different, and they're kind of from both from a race identity, sexual identity, all of that, um super different. I think that's also the very nature why they are in such contrast with this enemy, right? So for me, that was like a stroke of genius. Like I'm still like caught on the fact that the avatar, like the very soul of New York City, is a queer young black dude who is this graffiti artist just doing the most in the world. And I thought that was like super, super dope, right? All right, so here's kind of my thing, all right? When I think about the characterization in this book. So Manny, who is like the first borrow avatar that we meet, and he's like the first to wake, if you will. I love his story. Like he's like this ambiguous man. Like we're not quite sure of his race. We know he's not white, and he's not really like his identity is very unidentified. So it embodies the constant flux of Manhattan, right? Because Manhattan is always in flux. So I really like his story here. I also find that he's not your average ready to serve hero. He's very reluctant, but there's a lot of self discovery that he goes through that I quite like. Brooklyn, she's a badass, right? Brooklyn is like a former rapper. She's a councilwoman. She's defined. She's pulsing with cultural energy. So I really love her. But Bronca is my favorite. I know I give it like I think Bronca absolute badass. So Bronca's like an old Lenape woman, right? She's like this artist. And it's really interesting looking at reflecting on this character because there's a lot of like hidden wisdom that she brings. Very cynical, and maybe that's why this character was a turning point for me in the book because I was super cynical in the story. I'm like, this is intense and a lot, right? But also the way she kind of carries her past trauma and just evolves for me is really, really exciting. So I really like Bronca. And then we have like the avatar for queens. I call her Pad. Uh, the name is Padmini, but I call her Pad. I don't know. I kept calling her Pad in my head every time I read it. It's like also again we have an Indian immigrant, who's literally navigating living in America with visa complication, and she's the embodiment of queens. So. Like remember, I was talking about how just the diversity of these characters, and then we have like Aislinn, who's Staten Island, who's like this white woman who is burdened by a bigoted father and is literally like symbolizes like I was talking about like that isolation nature. I've not spent that much time in Staten Island. So I'm quite interested to actually hear from people who live in Staten Island how kind of they feel about this characterization because this particular character that embodies the spirit of Staten Island is very driven by prejudice. Like she literally was having a fit at the ferry and she was concerned that a black person was going to touch her, that kind of stuff, right? So I mean she creates a lot of challenges for herself. And I don't want she's central in the story in an interesting way, but I don't want to give it away. I think you should read it to kind of learn a bit more. But um, I also think, like, I mean, like I said, Sao Paulo is like our veteran. I think I've talked about Sao Paulo. The enemy is, also like the way the enemy is represented when we see the enemy in kind of like a physical form. It's like this woman in white, right? And this is like New York's primary antagonist, right? So obviously the core enemy here wants to, take down all of the great cities. But the kind of New York's main adversary that we fight in this book is this woman in white who literally plays on people's weaknesses and uses them to heighten what they presume to be external threats and things like that. She is literally a very menacing villain in this book. But yeah, so I really love the world building here. It is really great. I enjoyed the fact that, you know, the there's a lot of humanity in the way the story is told. And also just the way people evolve and kind of grasp who they are. Um yeah, it was a very fun book. It was a very fun book. I won't be doing like ratings anymore because I just don't think they're helpful. This is just a discussion, but it took a while for me to get into it. Like I said, it's visually and intensely written, high definition experience while reading this. But when I kind of turned a corner, it was worth it, and it made me feel like I'm not gonna lie, I felt it was intense. The moments where I just felt so heartbroken for just the state of the world. But also when they won, I felt great. When the little wins they had, I felt great. Their losses felt devastating. Um, but just watching the diversity at play here for me was super exciting. That's a wrap, readers. I hope you enjoyed that. Until next time, keep reading and keep discussing. You can find me on Instagram at GlobeMish. You can find me on TikTok as Mish Atagana without the E. Hopefully, we can talk more about these books. Until next time.